to see people more close up when you're speaking. So, and have a list of all the names. So please don't take that as any rudeness. So before we start, let's go around and introduce ourselves formally, if anybody's watching. And this is, of course, a meeting in public. I'm Zena Brabazon. I'm a Cabinet Member for Early Years Children and Families, and I'm a member of this committee and chairing it. Shall we go with the councillors first?
Thank you. Councillor Palmer, Councillor for Crouch End and a member of this committee.
I'm Councillor Ellen Weston. I'm a councillor for Hornsey Ward and a member of the committee.
Anne Graham, Director of Children and Young People's Services. Good evening.
I'm Felicity Foley. I'm the committee's manager and I'm clerk in the meeting.
As this is a meeting in public, there are rules about filming at meetings, which it can be filmed or recorded. I'm not going to read out the whole statement, but just to say, because it's a meeting in public, it can be recorded live and it can be shared on the internet and so on. So I don't think anything applies to this meeting because we have got no members of the public here, but for the record. Do we have any apologies for absence, Felicity?
Yes, Joe, we've got apologies from councillors Berryman, Chenot, James and Opoku. No, Chair.
Declarations of interest? Of the meeting are on page 1. Can we accept these as a correct record of the meeting? Are there any matters arising or any corrections?
Agreed. Oh, agreed that they're accurate. Can I just ask, there's just, yeah, sorry, Chair, there's one, just wondered whether we'd be able to have an update on the Scnd inspection or if that's not ready yet. Just it's an action on the meeting on page 5 of the pack.
Thank you, Councillor Brabazon. I'm able to give a response that the inspection happened and we've had the draft letter from Ofsted and it's going to be published this Friday. And so we're looking forward to that. So Friday, it's their letter and so they publish it. You know, because of the delay, some people think, what is the delay about? But it's totally in Ofsted's and the CQC's hands. Thank you.
If there are no other matters arising, can we accept the minutes as a true record? Fine, that's excellent.
Agreed.
So if you'd like to turn to page 7, we're on agenda item 6, which is the performance for 2020-2021. I'm not sure, is Bev be taking us through this then? Is Richard there? Is it Fires?
No, it'd be Richard or I think Bev.
Okay.
Bev, is Richard here? Okay, we'll hand over to Richard. Thank you.
Richard is there.
Yes, hi.
You're here, Richard, are you?
I am, yes. Thank you,
we can see
Councillor.
you now. I can see you in not real life. So would you like to take us through your report?
Certainly, yes. Right, first of all, I'll start saying, hang on, I've got an echo here, I'm sorry. Is that better? Can you hear me? Yep, okay.
We can hear you.
95 children in care as of the period of this report, which was the end of August, which is the last month we've got whole data for, which is in our expected range. It's slightly going up. Within that cohort, only 26 are unaccompanied asylum seekers, which is a bit lower than we would normally expect. Normally expect that before COVID, we'd expect the number to be in the 40s. And we'll come on to that in a minute, but the ceased and started
Richard, just to say,
have sort of cancelled themselves out, so we are staying steady at just below the 400.
Hello, Richard.
Children.
Richard, can you hear
But
us?
The beaten is quite a big but.
Richard, can you hear?
Within that
Richard,
normal flat level, the ins and outs balancing out, we haven't got as many UASCs starting as we normally would have. Normally, 1 in 4 looked after children are starting asylum seekers. At the moment, it's around 1 in 6. So we'd expect. Sorry.
Richard, we're just having the sound quality has declined.
Okay.
And so if you would like to hold on a moment, we're trying to get the technician to sort it out.
Is that better? I've tried without the headphones.
Bring your speaker volume down slightly so that it comes over more clearly.
Is that better? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry
that's
about
better.
Okay. Shall I carry on? Someone nod? Yep. Okay. So, sorry, I was just saying there about if the children start to be looked after, we've got fewer UASCs than normal. So although the numbers aren't going up, the anticipation is that if the normal rate of UASC starting does go back to normal, then we will have an influx and the system will be under pressure. So that's, at the moment, it's a sort of a false safety net. It looks okay at the moment, but it might not always be. Moving on to paragraph 2.5 of the report about permanency plans. The most frequent permanency plan is long-term fostering, which is quite normal. The proportions here haven't really changed. We've got 34 children with adoption as their long-term plan, and 12 of these are already placed for adoption. So we're fairly confident those will go through, which is good because last year, although adoptions were up slightly on, or so far this year, adoptions have been up slightly on 1920, they are still comparatively low when compared with their statistical neighbours and the national averages. Moving on to visits, which are 81% in August, which, considering it was the school holidays when children were away and social workers were away, so it's harder to get hold of people within the different timescales. We think 81% for August isn't bad, but it's not where we want to be. But 93% of these visits are now face-to-face, which is good. So we're getting back to normal there. I see Nicola's in the room. So I'm going to mention PEPs at 97%, which is another record high. We broke the record at the end of last term and we've done it again this term. So it's very well done. The next three paragraphs are all good news, really. It's about the stability of placements, which are consistently good at, and the health checks are excellent. The dental visits, not so excellent at 72%, but they are on the way back up to where they used to be. So it's a big improvement since last time. We want to be in the high 80s along with everybody else. And it looks like we'll be on track to get there when as the next few quarters go by. The care leavers, as normal, strong comparative performance. There's only a handful of care leavers in this cohort we're not in touch with. I think it's literally 6 or 7. And both the EAT and the accommodation percentages are looking very good. So that's the summary. Anyone got any questions?
Questions, Ellen?
Thanks, Zena. Thanks, Richard. After last time's meeting, I'm especially delighted about the PEPs. So thanks, everybody. That's great news. And also, it's really great to see the really strong performance from for our care leavers and the permanency and all of those things. It's such good news compared to where I know the service was some years ago. So it's so positive. My one question is around the care plans, only 79% being up to date. And I just wondered if there were any comments on that, because obviously we don't want these dips if we can possibly avoid them. I know they happen sometimes, but it's always, for me, looking at it the other way. So if 79% have got an up-to-date care plan, then 21% haven't. So I just wonder if we could say a few words about that. Thank you.
Fayez, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, of course. I think we are making improvement in terms of the care plans, and I think what really impacted is the lockdown period and the COVID, where we had a lot of difficulty in terms of updating the care plans. And I think most recently, one of the key challenges that we had, and I think that also impacted on the visits, is the staffing challenges. So we have got a number of vacancies in the service, and it's not a Haringey problem. I think it's a problem of all the, most of the London local authorities in terms of, getting staff in to manage those cases. We are working on it and we're trying to improve on that. But unfortunately, due to the staffing challenges, it has had an impact on the service. But it is improving.
So presumably there's a plan in place to improve it. I mean, mindful of the staffing problems. So by our next meeting, would we expect to see that higher? Or are we, just realistically, are we projecting that this is going to be the situation for a while?
It's not. It's Councillor, it's the same as last time. Obviously, we PEP was an issue, and we quickly we made significant improvement within a very short period of time. And I'm very, very confident that the same thing will happen in terms of the care plans.
Thank you.
Amy, you have any questions? I have a couple of questions. The first one is about NEETs and EATs. On page 11, if I've read the graph right, the number NEET percentage is 35%. Is that correct?
I'm just gonna. It's split into two for the two different age bands. I can't see a 35.
35, is that percent? That is percent.
Yes, sorry, yes, I'm with you now, yes.
I know we've been held a bit to account about NEETs in the past. What's the work programme to try and move the young people from being NEETs into employment or education or training or something a bit more purposeful? I don't know who would answer that, but I'll leave it to the officers.
I'm going to nominate Emma, but before I will say that the 35% is an improvement on last time. If you look at the row above at the EATs, you can see the dark blue line is quite a lot further over than last time's light blue line from 1920. So improvements are already being made, and we're ahead of the England average on this already. Over to Emma.
Yes, we've got some dedicated support, Councillor Brabazon, from Haringey Works, who is working with our 18 to 25-year-old population, and we're also working really, really closely with Drive Forward. What that represents actually is really good progress and very focused progress. We're really concentrating at the moment on our motivated and available post-18s. We've also just put forward 12 for the civil service internships. Last year we were very successful with that, so we're hoping to build on that success this year. We're prepping them at the moment with interview webinars and just getting them ready for virtual interviewing as well, which is quite exciting for them, I think. In terms of the post-16s, we've been working really, really closely with the virtual school, and we now have dedicated support from one of their officers, Sanjeev, and he is picking up all the NEETs as we go along. We're working really, really closely with the young people that are also in custody and making sure that they've got an educational plan and some thinking for resettlement back into the community. We're also working really, really closely with the virtual school on young people arriving in the borough. So our unaccompanied minors are very quickly picked up, and we're putting in place tuition for them, so there isn't too much of a gap between them and getting into college places. So we've got some really good plans in place, and that statistic, although it isn't 100%, as we would want every single one of our young people to be in education, training or employment. It's not possible, but we are doing everything that we can, and we have really positive, robust plans in place. So it's going in the right direction. Nicola, I don't know whether you want to add. Sorry.
That's a very positive picture, and obviously we're moving in the right direction. It would be interesting, perhaps in the next performance report, maybe to have a couple of case studies of some of your success. We're in a situation where I never thought we'd be in, where there are or so many millions of vacancies in this country. I mean, I know they're not going to be heavy goods vehicle drivers, but there's opportunities which perhaps we didn't think there would be. So a positive thing to look forward to. So if you could, I think we'd appreciate that. I'm looking at my colleagues, because, you know, a personal story really reaches you, and, you know, we get the data, but the story is what really brings it alive, really. But that's a very, very good. Sorry, Tammy.
Just to add to that, actually, what would be really useful actually is also some case studies from an employer's perspective. So actually, as a senior kind of HR person, I'm always trying to encourage kind of organisations to think about kind of inclusivity, underrepresented kind of groups, and actually what are the opportunities? So things like apprenticeships, internships. You know, we've got lots of those opportunities, and as Councillor Baberson says, the recruitment market is wide open at the moment, and organisations for the first time are wanting to be a bit more creative about how they recruit. It would be really good to have some case studies, some success stories from the employer's perspective as well, about the kind of journey that they've been on, kind of bringing people into their organisation, and how successful those individuals can be, in their fields, as well as they kind of grow in their careers. So it'd be really nice to hear both the individual and the employer experience.
Yes, yeah, we can definitely provide lots of case studies of our young people. We're so proud of many of their achievements. Maybe a bit more difficult from an employer's perspective, but I'm up for the challenge. Let's see what we can find.
Thank you, Emma. We know that we've got lots of stories from Haringey Community Gold. I just wonder whether within that bunch there are children who, in this cohort, who are looked after or care leavers to pull out. There might not be, but they've also got some of them had the employer aspect as well. Thank you.
I have another question. It's not really a question, it's an observation or a query. It's about permanence plans, and we've got, according to the numbers here, we have 29 young people in long-term residential. What is the age range of that group?
I don't know at the top of my head, but maybe Krista might have a better idea. But I'd imagine it goes across the spectrum, really.
I'm happy to take that question.
Yeah, okay, Bev.
So the age range of the children that we have in residential settings starts from 13 right up until just before their 18th birthday. That's someone's dog wanting attention. So, Councillor Representative, I'm not sure if you heard me.
When the young people are reaching 18 and there's some transition, what happens then if young people are in long-term residential and therefore quite sort of serious situations?
Yeah, so Councillor Representative, much investment has been made in setting up our transition panel and trying to strengthen our relationships with adults, not just in Haringey, but in the places in which our young people are placed. And so, as you'll know, Councillor Representative, from the age of 14 that we have there is a requirement for us to understand and identify the needs of young people who may need transition support into adulthood. That we start in earnest to do those identification at the age of 16 and start to line up our young people for their Care Act assessment, if that is the right route for them. Often it is, particularly from the looked after cohort. So the pathways to adulthood would start at the age of 16 generally for children who are not going to be staying put. And just speaking about the cohort in residential, that will largely be all of them. Some of our providers, because of the particular needs of the young people, can care for them up to the age of 19, of course, if they're CQC, but that wouldn't delay the work with the relevant adult safeguarding team.
Any further questions from the committee? Anne, is there anything you want to add?
Just to thank everyone for their continuous hard work and the focus on the outcomes for children and young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Certainly a positive report, and particularly in such a difficult period. So if we're content, we agree the report? Okay, so we'll move on. I think the next item on the agenda is something very, very I'm delighted that Anne is going to be giving this report. I just want to give a personal intro. I've heard some of the findings from this, but Tammy and Ellen, you have not come across this. It is a fantastic piece of work that you're going to hear about, and really proud that Anne and Bev have pioneered this in the borough.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brabazon, for that introduction. Felicity is going to help us by putting the presentation up on the screen, and while she does so, there may be some of you in the room who might not have heard this presentation either. The start of this work, which is on stop and search and taking a safeguarding perspective, kind of grew from a discussion with me and a former borough commander and the chief exec. We were talking about children who are stopped and searched, and in that discussion it was like, there are so many young people who are stopped and searched and we don't have the data on under 18s not shared with us, and it was, we know the harm that can happen, or at least that's my view, that there is potential for harm and distress, and how are we supporting those children and young people. Next slide please, thank you. So the borough commander at that time, there were two. It started by Helen Millichap and moved on to Tarina. We worked with one of her team, Ella Marriott, and myself, to lead this work between the two agencies. Bev Hendricks was very involved with it, as were some other police officers. We all agreed that it was helpful to look at this work from a safeguarding perspective, simply because, we all want to have the best interests of children and young people at heart. We started this work in early 2020, and so this is the conclusion of that work. Thank you. One of the things that we needed to do was build a relationship and form a common ground so we can continue with the work. We didn't want to start from opposite ends and immediately get into an impasse. So, we had to agree sort of some key points. It would be easy to say that if there was no stop and search at all, then there wouldn't be a problem. But you'll see that this is a policing tactic that the police use in their work. We also felt it was important, in helping the community to build trust, that we too built trust, commitment and a willingness to work together. And we had that in buckets, and, we were mindful of the context of Haringey, and we wanted to put all that beside us and just keep a focus on children and young people. So what we did was rather than come to, we thought it was necessary for each of the agencies to put down their working assumptions. And I want to give apologies for Seb, who was to be here tonight. He's the detective sergeant who isn't able to be here tonight. We were going to do a joint presentation to role model the jointness of this work, so he would have read this slide out. We did agree, and these are the police's working assumptions, and I'll soon come on to the local authorities' working assumptions. So the police's ones, and we agreed this, that safeguarding is everyone's business, and therefore any interaction with a child or a young person should be reflected in the police's work. And also that the police's priority is to safeguard and protect children. Point 2 on this slide, you'll see is stop and search is a legal and therefore legitimate policing tactic. And because this is their working assumptions, we accepted that. We were very clear we didn't want to get into the discussion about is this the right tactic or not. In order to move forward, we accepted their working principles. The police, if Seb was here, I'm sure I think he might say that stop and search can be a tactic that impacts on young people positively, and the aim is to prevent people coming to harm. The police do acknowledge from their own research and reports about stop and search that there is an impact on the black community in particular, not the only community, but in particular, and that absolutely can have a moving away, can prevent people engaging with them. So the police have a lot of data, and one of the key points at the bottom was, well, where do we begin to do this work? Because we were all very new to it, we thought it would be helpful to work on just a small cohort of children and young people. So we looked at those who were stopped and searched from 14 years and under. And through this presentation, we'll give you some data on that number. The working assumptions from the local authority were really that it is a joint duty for everyone to work to prevent harm to children. And so we had a shared understanding of the emotional and psychological aspects that could impact young people who are stopped and searched. There are advantages too, and this was one of the key things that in thinking about this work, stop and search happens and then nobody's told about it. And it can be, and there is the potential from our perspective for this to be seen as intrusive, and children and young people, their parents, their schools and carers, no one's told about it. So we thought that there'd be advantages to parents and carers being informed of a stop and search encounter, so that we can understand a child's reaction if a child goes into school the next day or goes home and is stressed and upset and they haven't been able to disclose a stop and search. Then this might be what's driving their behaviour. We wanted to explore the links between stop and search and vulnerable and exploited children and young people. We thought that this work would be helpful to us understanding that. We, as I've said earlier, think that children may experience trauma, and therefore, if they are, we want to be in a position to be able to help them to overcome this. And I've mentioned already the perception that young people might have. One thing we want in our borough plan is to increase the trust in the police and also the local authority and other agencies. And so, therefore, we wanted to be sure that we knew that was a factor, and stop and search might get in the way. We worked really hard to reduce contextual safeguarding, extra familial harm as it's more usually referred to, and so this work too would help us in that arena. Okay. This slide I'm going to skip because it's about the methodology and what we did. I just want to, before I hand over to Bev, just take us through some of the data. Sorry, Bev, there's a few slides called findings. I'll hand over to you once I've got to past the first 2 pages. So here are the broad numbers. So we took the police data, as I say, and they had quite a lot. If you think about the numbers of stop and search under aged 18, and there was quite a lot. And we were developing the skill here of understanding what is it we're going to look at and how we're going to do it. So starting with the under 14s, aged 14 and under, was where we, it was a manageable cohort. 242 was the total number of stop and search records, and that's the episodes. And to me, that was a lot. Didn't really have an expectation, but when I realised that there were 214, that's, what is that? Is that 20 a month? That was a lot for me. And these were where there was no further action. So there would be some others where there was action. They would have already been arrested and charged, and they're in the system. But these were those where there was no further action. 25 of that 242 were discounted. And this is because no identifiable details were given, and you don't have to give the police your detail. So not everybody did. Of course, a lot of young people do because they're speaking to authority. So 217 stop and search records were analysed by the police, and then they looked at them and made a decision, should they refer them for safeguarding purposes into our system. And the way that they do that is through producing a Merlin. They do that every day where they feel that children are at harm, and so this was a legitimate route through. 196 stop and search records had no Merlin report, but 21 did. And 21 were 21 stop and searches. It was felt that there was an issue for the child, and so they were created and sent through to us. You'll see that table in the top right-hand corner. It shows you that of the 200 of the stop and searches, I think it's the 217, 132 were aged 14, 68 were aged 13, 14 were aged 12, and three 11-year-olds were stopped and searched. We do have gender split, but it might not be in this presentation. As expected, the vast majority are boys. So this is my last slide before I hand over to Bev. Thank you. You may have heard me say earlier that it was 217 recorded incidents. What we know is that a number of young people get stopped and searched on more than one occasion. So it was 168, no, got that the wrong way around, 186 young people were stopped and searched, and 20 young people, their stop and searches accounted for 51 of the total. So again, you'll see in that top right-hand table that 2 young people were stopped and searched 13 times. 3 young people were stopped and... Oh, have I got that? No, got that the wrong way round. I thought that was slightly alarming. Please accept my apology. It's 13 young people were stopped twice. Phew. Oh, absolutely, and apologies. 4 young people were stopped 3 times, and 2 young people were stopped 4 times, and 1 young person was stopped 5 times. And so it took a lot of work to get to this point, and what we did was draw analysis from that finding. So, Bev, if it's okay, shall I hand over to you at this point?
Yes, it's okay, Anne.
Thank you.
Is the audio working well?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So in this, the work that we had to do with the police was really, as Anne said, it was her leadership around building the confidence to get to this, which was for me the nub of the matter, to understand the safeguarding implications for our young people. So we reviewed, a fuller review was conducted on young people aged 12 years and under. And of that, the outcome of that review is that there was 16 total, there was 16 total number of young people who were searched, who were assessed to be under the age of 12 and under. 2 of the young people declined to provide their personal details because there's no requirement to do so, and so we couldn't complete the safeguarding audit and review of their needs. 12 of the young people were known to the police or previously had incidences on the indices, and 6 young people were identified as not known to the police. The 5 young people were referred to Haringey Children's Services. Felicity, would you move on to the next slide for me? The learning from doing the analysis with a safeguarding lens told us the 7 points that you can see here, that those unknown to the police in the fuller review of those under 12 were few in number, very few females, and there was a majority of those who were stopped and searched were already known to the police, and some of those were within the known category, were stopped and searched a number of times against the spreadsheet that Anne included in her top column, more than on 2 or 3 occasions. Now, if I sit with 3, that the police had intelligence that was unknown to them, that's really helpful to us in our systems safeguarding approach. And we'll come on and talk about how some of the recommendations as a result of that analysis. What was the compelling finding and learning from this was that the police safeguarding considerations were less evident when conducting stop and search than in other policing responses. So there was an area where the stop and search wasn't open to the safeguarding partnership and the same levels of scrutiny as we find in other areas of our safeguarding well. Felicity, would you turn to the next slide, please? This slide sets out 10 recommendations, and 4 of the recommendations include things about the need to constantly review and really open it up for a number of other safeguarding expertise lens to look at what's happening with children who are stopped and searched. 2 involve recommendations around training. 1 is a crucial one around identification, having a transparent and clear process to identify our children who are stopped and searched. 1 suggests some work around parental engagement, and another one suggests strengthening partnership, and critically to keep the cycle of learning going. Now, if I go to the last slide, thanks, Felicity. The recommendation of that early learning exercise led to some very tangible outcomes. So there's a very strong relationship between us and our business command unit and the police officers that are involved. That we have agreed already that we're going to do some joint training and learning with them and us. That we are going to continue this piece of work and pull out the learning, but from a wider cohort, and use the learning to make some of those system changes and adjustments that I think is necessary in this area. We have really, I think, solve the confidence questions and the data protection questions and how this can be done across the force and children's social care. And we're moving now to start to share the early findings and the approach we're going to take to ensure that we are creating a visibility for the Haringey Children's Safeguarding Partnership on this thorny area of stop and search for some of our young people. And I think I'll pause there for any questions.
Thanks,
both. That's a really, really amazing report. I've got a couple of questions. So my first question, so Anne, on your slide, you talked about the fact that there were no Merlin reports created for a really significant number of those stop and searches. Is that simply because the police found nothing, that there was no reason for the stop and search, or they just didn't report, or they just didn't do it? Because in my mind, if you stop a child and you find a weapon or drugs, that's a safeguarding, you know, that is a reason to create that report, regardless of, you know, of anything else. So I just wondered if it was the fact that they just didn't do it, or that the stop and search was completely unwarranted and unnecessary. My second question, it's a much bigger question. So trust and confidence in the police is at an all-time low. Let's just be, you know, and it has been for a really long time, certainly with young people, and certainly with young people from the Black community and other kind of BAME communities. And I think kind of incidents over the last couple of weeks with the Sarah Everard case have kind of once again evidenced that trust and confidence is not there, particularly with women, and just as a general sense. And I wonder if there is a watershed moment for particularly the Metropolitan Police at the moment. I kind of feel that there needs to be, you know, I think we can't keep seeing this. We can't keep seeing these reports and seeing young people from particular communities being disproportionately stopped and searched and policing. We have a legitimate reason to do those things. I think the sense in the, you know, from the general public now is that the unconscious bias that's shown by the police in all manner of respects is no longer acceptable, and that we're not going to tolerate this. And I think there has to be a watershed moment for young people to confidently feel that they could go and ask a member of the police force for help. Sorry, but you know, there's no way that I would be telling my kids to go and ask a member of the police force for help right now. That's the person that should be asking. And actually, if I'm a young man, particularly a young Black man walking around Haringey, and I have no trust and confidence in that person to help me, and I'm just going to believe that they're going to stop and search me because of my ethnicity, there has to be a change. And so I wonder, perhaps, Bev, in the teaching and training that you do, there's something much bigger than learning. There is something really significant about using this kind of data to drive that really long-lasting change that we have to see now. It's almost like, you know, enough really is enough now. So that's not a question, actually, sorry. that's a minor speech.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. I'll try and come into bits of that because, you know, I accept that you say it's a speech and it's a half question. And and I think that takes us to the point about those assumptions. We had to agree those assumptions, and though we discussed and we discussed views in the room, the police are employed to be police officers, and so therefore policing is legitimate. The police are aware of their trust and confidence, and doing this work in part is about that trust and confidence. Actually, you know, this isn't information that's that's widely available, that's widely, you know, circulated, and so I'm really pleased that we've got their confidence and trust to do this work and to continue to do it, because we were able to use the information positively with some children and young people, and I think that this is an avenue. But there will always, I suppose, be, you know, discussions about trust and confidence in the police, and we can't be at a more important time in our policing history with what's happened. Was it last week, or, you know, and I think that we were shocked by the outcome we were shocked that a police officer is imprisoned for life without parole, or, you know, so we tried to keep away from that, and we tried to focus on the children and young people. And so positives have come out of it, and I'm really pleased about that. I'm mindful too that my police colleagues, officer colleagues, are not in the room as well to answer for them. And so I won't try and answer for any of the police questions. So I'm not able to say, and I don't have the information about those that didn't result in a Merlin. I don't have that information. I'm assuming that it's that they didn't, the police are statutorily obliged to refer. And it's not in every incident that when a child is stopped and searched that there should be a referral. We're mindful of that. So I'll leave it at that, if that's okay. And yeah, thank you.
Ellen, have you got some points you want to raise?
There we are, I'm back. Thanks so much for the report. And I think to pick up on, Anne, what you said, I think not to undermine or avoid those questions of general trust and confidence in the police, many of which I agree with Tammy, but I think it's right to commend this piece of work, because I don't think it's every police authority that would be willing to be this open about these kinds of statistics, or to be willing to share them. And so I think it's a really positive first step in that sense. So I really welcome the work that's been done. I'm sure that because this is just the start of the process, you probably won't be able to give me any answers on this just yet. But I wonder if in a future meeting we might come back to this with some of the really concrete outcomes. So obviously the learning is the first step, but then my question, I'm sure colleagues' questions would be, well, what difference will this make for children and young people in the borough and for our looked after children? So I know this is the start of that process, but I think at a future meeting, I'd be really, really interested to hear, how this has made a difference to practice and how, therefore, to young people in the borough. But thank you.
Thank you very much. The numbers are very small, and so there are some positives that have come out of this already. Bev, I'm wondering whether you want to mention a couple of those, bearing in mind that the numbers are small. There might be some things we can say that are very general. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. So you might remember me referring to the 5 that were known to children's social care. When we looked at the needs of those 5 children, I'll illustrate by way of a story very quickly. One of them was a child who was looked after, was having a very difficult time at school, and wanted to leave earlier on the staggered hours, but wasn't arriving at the care provider's address for some time. He was stopped and searched, and that was isolated to the police. But when we did the analysis, we were able to take the reports on the reasons for the stop and search and the fact that this young person had been stopped and searched, and make adjustments with our foster carers, make adjustments with the school, make adjustments with the IRO in the looked after system, and also reach out to the people that he would have contact with, and do some work to disrupt the network that would adversely affect him being able to prosper as a looked after child. So there are more examples of the impact of this work, but that is how that's an example of how the system with better intelligence was able to adjust itself to better meet the needs of this child.
Questions?
No, thanks, Bev. That's really helpful. And I suppose probably when I refer to changes in practice, perhaps I'm thinking more of the police as well, but that story is really helpful to illustrate things from the authority's position and the authority's responsibilities. So that's so useful. So yeah, perhaps in future we might get a police officer to the meeting and can talk about the changes from their end as well. Because particularly some of the findings, as far as I could see them, where police officers aren't completing appropriate referrals, where police officers aren't keeping appropriate records, that's always serious. It's particularly serious where it's a young person, sometimes a very young person, and all the potential harms or repercussions that those stop and search incidents can have. So, yeah, I think that would be useful in future if we were able to have a senior enough police officer here. And I know that can be tricky for a number of reasons, but that's my plea. Thanks.
And if you're comfortable, the echo. Councillor Brabazon, are you happy for me to respond to that?
Yeah, would you? Yeah, please do.
Yes, it would be helpful to have our colleagues from the police that we're working with from the police here. And I think one of the things they would say is that we have been able to negotiate securing more the Merlins to come in to be reported into our MASH so that we can continue to look at this. So I'm fairly confident that from the work that has been done so far, that there has been a commitment to submit the Merlins to the MASH for us to continue this piece of work, doing the analysis, making the adjustments, both strategically and making an immediate difference where possible for those young people.
Could I come? I'm sorry, Anne, a big pardon.
Just to say that Seb, our police colleague, Seb Ajay Ado, was lined up to, but something happened and, you know, he was unable to, but yes.
Could I come on with a few points? The first one is, since Anne has been able to share this, the first time it's been shared outside of meetings, it might be something we might consider maybe as our committee hosting a wider event for our colleagues, because this is such a huge issue. But that can be in the fullness of time, Anne, when you feel the time is right. In relation to some of the work, I've heard this presentation, I've heard more about this piece of work, and I have a couple of, I suppose, queries or questions. One is about one of the recommendations, which is about notifying parents about stop and search of young people, which currently is not the case, as I understand it. So just remind me, in the course of this work, well, did that happen? And if it did it have any different outcomes? I think maybe the case just cited, and if there were others, as I recall, and whether that is now becoming part of practice. And the second thing is about, in looking at this through a safeguarding lens, have you seen an impact on the local policing teams?
Councillor Brabazon, I think in the example that Bev gave, that's an example, although it was a foster carer that was informed, that did have impact. And the number that we had was so small, it's hard to be, statistically proper. Forget the proper word, sorry, it's been a long day, relevant about them. Yeah, thank you. Can I say that this report was shared with HMI Probation when we had the thematic inspection, and we'll bring back that information at the next meeting. The thematic inspection by HMI Probation was into disproportionality for Black and dual heritage boys, and they were really impressed with how far we'd got with this work, and we're leaders not just in London but probably in the country in this area of work, and they have made reference to this area, not necessarily directly our work in their report, and that will be helpful for this debate nationally as we go forward. Thank you.
Ellen.
Thank you. Just to follow on from that, so that did strike me when we were listening to the presentation, that this must be fairly groundbreaking work in lots of ways. And Zena, I don't know whether maybe you could write to the Mayor of London, at the point that, in conjunction with Anne, because I think we're not as good as we should be at blowing our own trumpet when we do good work. And we do a lot of good work, and sometimes it gets recognised and sometimes it doesn't. And I think bringing this kind of work to the attention of sort of the wider London powers could be something really valuable, because it deserves recognition.
Yes, I would want to do that, but it's sort of been embargoed, actually, because I wanted to do exactly what you just said. I think I even said it to Anne a while ago, but held back by some of these procedural things. But I think we should certainly be sharing it with the MPs, and we could invite them to a presentation. I think there are far-reaching implications of this, because once you start looking at this through a safeguarding lens of children and young people, and that goes back to my question about whether it would then change how the police interact with young people. Once you start sharing information and you're looking in what the backgrounds are, there's a whole different issue, and I'm assuming that's where this research is sort of moving. So I agree with you. I think there are huge implications from it, and I do think we need to start getting our act together to make it a bit more of a presentation or a roadshow that we can share, now that the police have agreed to that, because they themselves must see this, as Tammy said, this is a big watershed for them right now in lots of areas, and this is one.
Yeah, I suppose if I can just come back to my original point, I suppose this is so groundbreaking that this could be that watershed moment, and if that's not led by them, it's led by us. And there is probably no borough that can and should lead it other than Haringey, if I'm being perfectly honest. With our history and the challenges that we have had here, and actually our demographics and the amazing young people that we've got that deserve better, quite frankly. If it is to be a watershed moment, then it should be us that leads it. And it is an amazing piece of work. It's very raw and honest, and I genuinely hope that the police kind of take this opportunity to reflect on the experiences of young people and the impact that stop and search can have on young people, and change things and do things differently. I genuinely do. I think it's amazing. It's really brave as well in this kind of environment, and it is a really difficult environment, I think, to have the trust to work with the police, and to also have to put aside, I'm sure, some of your own your own principles and beliefs to make this work for everybody. I think it's an incredibly brave thing to do. So really well done for doing it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And, again, I'll apologise for Seb, but you can see the value of us both being here to have that joint presentation. And that was one of the blocks that the police wanted, but now they've sort of unlocked that a bit. We'll be doing solo presentations just to get the information out there, really. Yeah.
Now dip the toe in the water of making it public, Anne. I think we're all agreed that we should do that, and where people have done the work should get the credit, and actually it is, we've all agreed. I said exactly the same thing. I said to Anne when I heard it, this is amazing, groundbreaking. I use exactly the same words as you've just used. So it's been a long time, and it's our small committee here, but this is the first time, and it is now in the public arena, because this is a meeting in public. So I very much hope that we will be following that up, Anne, and perhaps we talk to the borough commander about our next steps to make this more visible. And as I said, I think writing to the MPs, especially considering one of our MPs is a shadow minister for justice, I think it would be a long history in dealing with this issue. I think it would be timely to let the MPs know.
And just on that, can I just say that in doing that, I know that from your perspective, this wouldn't be the outcome, but I think there could be a risk that, and I'm sure some of the police's apprehension about this is that it's, perhaps another stick to hold over their heads or whatever it might be. And I can understand that. But I think in Haringey, probably like nowhere else in the country, we've got an understanding that if we're going to deal with issues that are very difficult, we've got to confront them. And we have done that in the past, which is why on the previous, and continue to, which is why in the previous report, we're seeing all of these much better outcomes and much more consistent good performance across the service, because we've faced up to what's happened in the past and been honest. And so in saying this is not about blowing our own trumpet to the detriment of the police. It's recognising the bravery on both sides. And entering into this shows, I think, at least a small willingness to be self-reflective, to think about how things can be different, and that's what we're after, isn't it, for those young people? So just if police colleagues are watching, then it is to reassure that that's very much the spirit that we're all approaching this in, I think.
I think we all echo that, but that comes back to the, I suppose what I was trying to get at is whether once you start looking at this from a different angle, through a different lens, consciousness, you're raising consciousness, you're raising ideas, a perspective that's different, and that should inform practice and behaviour. And that was the question that I really want to get sort of here directly. And I think we did have a meeting with the police, and I think they were very open. So, you know, I think all things being equal, you know, it's not a one picture. It's all very complex and different situations, different people, and people put their hands up and they say, yes, we need to change. Yes, we didn't think about it that way. So this has just opened a door. I think it's been a great piece of work by Anne and her team and with the police. Everybody deserves the credit.
Can I say thank you, councillors, for your thanks, and I'll send those on to the team and also to our police colleagues. I have to say that from the very first discussion with Helen Millichap and subsequent discussions with Ella, Marriott and Seb and Trina, that there's not been a resistance. There's been a willingness to engage, and and if I dare say so, they have been pushing us. They've got greater capacity than we have, so they've been pushing us to get this work completed, and also we're moving on to phase 2 of this work, and so I'm so grateful to them for the bravery. I absolutely understand the hesitation about the report and being careful, because actually, we don't want this as a stick, as you say, Councillor Weston, to hold over us. It is about trying to make lives and outcomes for children and young people. So, I'm really pleased that they have joined with us and we have joined with them to have really difficult discussions, and we hope that everybody else will see this work in that way so we can move forward with it. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for putting all your efforts into this. And I think we'll move on, and we will be following up the suggestions about the mayor and our MPs and so on, because if we share it, it gets its own momentum, and that's another issue, another angle. So if we move on, the next report is item 8, which is on page 13, and that is the Adopt London North Annual Report. Faiz, I think you're giving this report?
It's actually Lydia who's here.
Hi.
Councillor President.
Hello, I'm Lydia Samuel. I'm Head of Service for Adopt London North. Nice to be here this evening. Would you like me to share my screen to show the report, or would you like me just to talk to it?
I think it's quite a long report, unless you have slides. Do you want to just talk to it, and then we can ask some questions? Is that okay with everybody? Is that okay with you?
Happy to do that. Yeah, happy to. So yeah, it is a wide-ranging report. It covers a lot of areas. So I will skim over some of the areas that might not be as of much interest to you, and try to focus on the key points in the report. But I'm happy to be stopped at any point if I'm going too fast or too slowly through, or to answer any questions. So I'm sure will be aware that Adopt London North is the regional adoption agency covering Haringey and 5 other boroughs in North London. Regional adoption agencies were formed as a result of a law change in 2016 requiring local authorities to deliver adoption in groups. In regional areas, the government felt that would improve practice, because local authority adoption services had previously been very small, lots and lots of small agencies across the country doing the same thing. And so we went live in October 2019. We are hosted by Islington, but we are jointly funded and managed and governed by all of our 6 boroughs. So Beverley sits on our governance board and has oversight of all of the key decisions above my level, and I also meet regularly with fires and other heads of service and service managers to manage the practice issues that we face. And we have a wide variety of areas that we cover. So we are responsible for supporting Haringey with permanency planning decisions where children may have a plan for adoption. We're responsible for family finding and supporting the matching process and the transition into adoptive families for children where that happens. We also recruit and train and approve adoptive parents. And we provide adoption support to anyone living in Haringey or the other boroughs who has adopted in the past, and to adopted adults as well. So I just wanted to talk initially about the recruitment area of practice, and I'm going to focus on some of the key things that we found in the first 18 months, but particularly over the last year. We've obviously had an interesting time. We were 6 months into the agency when COVID hit, so much of the sort of comparisons that we've been able to make are quite tentative at the moment. We don't have sort of a full year running before we had the COVID impact, so I'll be referring to that a little bit as I go through. One of the key features, I suppose, of what we've been able to do is that we formed a partnership with other regional agencies across London. Together we cover 23 of the boroughs. Next year it will be 24, with Greenwich joining the south. So we're Adopt London's north, south, east and west, and we work in partnership together. And that's been really helpful, particularly in terms of recruitment of adopters, because as somebody considering adoption, most people will Google something online or ask around, and they will immediately find Adopt London. We're no longer sort of those, as you can imagine, 23 boroughs previously competing with one another for attention. We are one sort of adoption brand online, and people find us very easily that way. So we've already seen a really significant increase in people approaching us to consider adoption, and in people choosing us over other adoption agencies. And we're hoping that over time that's going to be one of the areas in which working together, I suppose, bears the biggest fruit and gives us lots of capacity to change things. Another thing that's been really effective is just the fact that we've not been having to use paid advertising or paid marketing as we did in the past because of our sort of brand awareness. So everything that we've done is through the website and social media, and I've given some details, but you know, last year we had over 40,000 unique visitors to our website in 12 months. So we're seeing a lot of people sort of becoming aware of us and considering adoption. And that's especially important because adoption has a really long lead in time. People think about it for a really long time, understandably, before they actually commit to an assessment. So I've provided some details in the report about the inquiry levels, and we've tried to compare them as best we can to the data we had when we were 6 separate boroughs. It doesn't compare exactly, but we think that last year we had around a 50% increase in the number of people attending sessions and then going on to make formal inquiries with us to adopt. What we need to see now over time is monitor how that translates through, you know, into approvals, but particularly into the types of approvals of adoptive parents that we need particularly. As you would imagine, last year during the pandemic, it was challenging. I think one of the biggest impacts that we've seen in terms of recruitment of adopters is the complexities that we all know about impacting people's lives. So deaths of loved ones, loss of jobs, and other sort of instability in their lives that means that they may have to consider waiting a bit longer before they're ready to adopt. So that has had an impact, but something that's starting to settle now. We've also seen some real benefits of sort of being able to innovate, as many people have, you know, through the pandemic and the virtual way of working. So one of the brilliant things that we've been able to introduce is sessions online every month, where anybody from the public who's interested in adoption can come along and just hear from adoptive parents who share completely openly, and they answer any question that anybody sort of throws at them, and talk about their experience as adopters. And we're already really basically seeing the impact of that in terms of people who come through to assessment being much more realistic, much more open to considering the types of challenges that children might have when they are placed for adoption. So I've also included in the report some data around the approval of adoptive parents and the process, the progress through the system of different numbers of adopters. Last year, the approvals were low. There was a significant drop in numbers, and that was largely due to the impact that I've spoken about in terms of the pandemic. Some people had to actually be not complete the last part of their assessment because we weren't able to meet them in person at certain stages of the pandemic. But we're pleased to say that that significantly picked up already this year, and we've already completed I think it's 18 approvals already in the first half of this year. So we're expecting our performance to return to pre-regionalisation levels this year, and to be able to grow things from there. One of the key considerations for us in coming together as a regional agency is to see if we can tackle some of the really tricky issues that we faced when we were separate boroughs. Although we worked together in a consortium, we didn't have as much ability to sort of join up and solve some of the difficulties as we do now. And on page 16 of my report, I've included some sort of summary level data of the number of prospective adopters that are coming through our system of different ethnic groups, and we've grouped those into broader categories than we would normally in order to try to illustrate how that matches the population of children of different ethnic groups. We know that being able to have enough adoptive families for our Black children and dual ethnicity Black children particularly has been a very long-standing challenge across the whole country and is particularly acute in London because of our population. And so we really need to be over recruiting from that community. Although we do place children what we call transracially, which is place them in families that are not of the same ethnic background, that's really not our preference, and it's not something that we is right for every child or every adopter. And so increasing the number of Black and dual Black ethnicity families that we have is a key priority. This is an illustration of how working across Adopt London has started to be effective for us. So we have committed this year to starting a partnership with a consultant in this area called Laurel Brown and her company to work with us for over a long-term project. We're looking at 5 years at this stage to really try to understand in a much sort of deeper and more detailed way the challenges that we face in this area and why. So instead of sort of in the past, I think, reaching for solutions quickly, we want to really try to get underneath the issue and look at how we can try to resolve this over a longer term. The first part of this work is going on at the moment, and that's a really detailed data analysis. So we're looking at things like where Black families that apply to adopt might be most likely to drop out of the process and what those reasons might be, so that we can begin to think about how we might do things differently or think about particular schemes or areas of support. And hopefully I look forward to coming back next year and being able to sort of share a lot more about how we're getting on with that project and all of the findings from that first stage. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the children and the areas of support that we provide in this area. One of the key areas of practice where we have crossover is attending permanency planning discussions, and our role in that is to try to really support Haringey with social workers and managers with thinking about where adoption might be appropriate and providing sort of that more expert sort of advice and guidance in that area, particularly thinking about things like contact with birth family members and particular needs that children might have. And so I've included some data in there regarding referrals through, and Haringey's referrals are consistent to us over that time. So there's strong arrangements in place to make sure that the children that are considered should be. I've also included some data on page 18 regarding the number of decisions that have been made for adoption care plans in Haringey, and you'll see that compared across the boroughs. So Haringey is one of the boroughs where we place the highest number of children across the boroughs that we work with, and you had 14 placement orders made last year, which is the orders made by the court to place a child for adoption. So one of the things that we saw in terms of family finding last year was that it became more challenging to sort of reach out to prospective adopters. We are open to placing children across the country where we need to, but we really want to focus on improving the number of in-house placements that we make and placements that we make across London, so that we keep our London children in the area that they were born and where their birth family are, but at a safe, in a safe place, at a safe distance from their birth family. So part of the detailed planning that takes place is looking at where the birth family might reside and which areas would be safe for that child to live in. For some children, it may not be safe for them to live in this area, but we know that it can be particularly challenging to move to a completely different area of the country, maybe a rural area, and all of the sort of changes and difficulties that that brings. So we can really support local placements in a much sort of easier and more robust way. We've been able to trial this year having virtual activity mornings for our children. So we've pioneered this opportunity for, we have an entertainer and the foster carers have the children at home with them, and they attend on a Zoom session and they watch the entertainer and they just react in a natural way. And the prospective adopters that might be considering those children are able to attend with their cameras off. So it doesn't interfere with the children's enjoyment. It doesn't feel like they're being watched, but the adopters are able to see them in a really sort of natural, relaxed environment. And this has had really positive feedback from foster carers, particularly, who feel like the children are able to be at their best during that opportunity. And it means that we hope, through sort of continuing to do more and more things like this, that we want our adopters to really see the children for the children that they are, with all of their strengths, and not just see maybe what you might see on paper when you look at some of the challenges that they bring. So I've included some information on page 20 of my report about the number of in-house families that we placed children with last year versus external families. And in London, we've always used a mixture of external placements and in-house placements, but you'll see last year around a third were in-house, which is good. And we're continuing to see a really strong performance in this area this year. In fact, all of our adopters who have been matched with children this year have all so far taken Adopt London North families, for children from our boroughs. So we're really seeing that the adopters are sort of being prepared and coming forward in a way that they're committed to our children, particularly in North London, but also London children, which is really fantastic. Another area that we've been sort of pioneering and that's been good for us to bring together all of our capabilities across the boroughs has been in some specific child publicity. So occasionally, you know, we have children who, particularly where they have disabilities or complex needs, it can be really hard to identify a family that's able to be matched with them. And so we are trying sort of areas where we use an illustration rather than a photograph, and we don't use a real name, but we develop publicity that goes into publications such as autism publications or teaching publications, to try to encourage people to come forward either for that specific child or for other children with additional needs like that child. And we have seen some initial positive interest in people coming forward for some of the children with challenging needs. Yet to be seen whether that sort of translates through to people actually being able to go on and adopt these children, but that's something that we're following up. So I've reported some figures on page 21 of the number of children currently, that at the end of March we were currently family finding for in Haringey, and that was 11. And we continue to, between Haringey and ourselves, closely track these children with regular tracking meetings, looking at their plan a lot of children, it's not unusual after they have a placement order to have pauses in family finding, where they might be having medical assessments or where a family member might have come forward. So for some children, the family finding journey can be stop and start. For some children, it can be very straightforward and things can progress very quickly. We also manage the transitions of children along with the child social worker when they go into an adoptive placement, and we've begun to introduce a research-based model for moving children. It's called Moving to Adoption, based on the University of East Anglia's research, and it encourages us to really take longer about the initial meetings of the child and the adopters, and also the time in which the adopters have a sort of goodbye period with the foster carer after they've moved into the adoptive home. Really thinking about the child's sort of emotional need to have that ongoing contact and to have a much more gradual transition process than we maybe did previously. So the model is already being implemented on a child-by-child basis, and we are now doing some further work with heads of service to sort of come up with foundational principles that we will use to support this model, and also rolling out training to foster carers in your borough and to supervising social workers and children's social workers as well, so that they really start thinking very much from the child's perspective about how some of these principles can impact on the way that the child settles into their adoptive placement. And we hope that some of these things will be helpful and interesting to think how they apply to other areas of looked after children's work as well when we move children between placements. I've included some information about the number of placements made and also the characteristics of the children, and this is across Adopt London North, not just Haringey. So a third of the children that we placed last year were in sibling pairs. And when we look at the ethnic breakdown, we have 45% of children in the Black and Black dual ethnicity category, again when we summarise those categories so that it's easier to compare. 45% in the white category and 10% in the Asian and Asian dual ethnicity category. So that gives an idea, really, it's something that we'll monitor over time, but gives an idea of the level of adopters of different ethnic groups that we really need to be trying to achieve in the future. And just a note here, I suppose the reason why we're not just looking at minority ethnic groups as a whole in terms of the areas that we're targeting is because we don't find the same challenges, particularly with Asian and dual Asian ethnicity children. We find that we have more adopters than the number of children to place, and we don't see the same delays. And I've also given some summary data about the age of children. We do see a majority of children are in the younger age group, as you might expect, being placed for adoption. But we also really encourage social workers to consider whether adoption's right for children going up in age. And the oldest child that we placed last year was 6 years old. It's not right for every child, but it's something that we want to make sure is considered where it's appropriate. And finally, I'll just move on to talk about the area of support. It's the largest team in our service, and it has been very challenging as across, all sort of early help and front door services across the pandemic with some of the difficulties that we're seeing. We administer something called the Adoption Support Fund on behalf of the government, which is a way that adoptive families can access therapeutic support, which is funded by the central government fund. This is a fantastic resource for families, and it can also cause tensions and a lot of administration, but it's great that families actually have a way of accessing direct support, which is sort of in their hands. And we administered over £860,000 worth of that therapeutic support last year, so it's a big area of our work. Some of the challenges we really saw increasing were around adolescent and younger than adolescent, really preteen mental health. And particularly we really see the overwhelm in the CAMS and other mental health services for young people. So we have families coming to us who previously would have been getting their support through that route and are now saying that the waiting lists are so long or the thresholds have increased to such a level that they're not being accepted or seen by those services. And so they're reaching out to us for support through the Adoption Support Fund or social work support. And it's fantastic that we have that there to offer them, but it's a challenge for us now to learn how to make sure that we can really address those needs safely. We're not a CAM service. It's meant to be sort of a lower level of therapeutic support. So we're continuing to work with providers and try to do that as effectively as possible, really. We also want to look at how we can have conversations across the North London sort of health authority about the situation with CAMS thresholds and how we work together where there are adopted families in our areas. Much of the support that we provide, so I've given a little diagram on page 24 which just shows the levels, the tiers of support that we provide. So the very broad support that we provide to a lot of families is our duty service, and so a lot of people will be calling us asking for signposting, asking for some basic information or a conversation with a social worker. And then we have short-term support, which is really targeted. It's often accessing therapeutic support or supporting with a conversation with a school, for example, and we'll provide a social work support in a time-limited way. And then we have a smaller number of families who have very, very complex needs. They may be at risk of breakdown, they may not be, but the children have very complex challenges and are difficult to parent, and they need social work intervention, and they need a sort of multidisciplinary approach to be coordinated, and we'll work with them for a longer period of time. Often these children may also meet the threshold for your mainstream services, so like the children in need services, and we would be working across to try and help promote that understanding of them as an adoptive family. And I think some of the quotes I've included there just show, I think families really appreciate speaking to someone who understands adoption in a way that not every sort of social worker who is coming into contact with adoption very rarely can do. So they appreciate the specialist understanding, and we want to continue this year particularly to provide more drop-in and training opportunities for social workers in the MASH teams, in the front door teams, to help them understand how to support adoptive families. A really important area of our adoption support is our partnership with We Are Family. They are a peer adopter-led organisation across London that we supported when we were 6 boroughs working as a consortium, and we've really been able to sort of formalise that as Adopt London now and provide support for them to grow. It's an absolutely incredible resource for our adopters. Anybody who's adopted across London can join for free, can access local networks in person, but also through the pandemic, we've introduced specialist webinars and training opportunities 26 times a year that are available after the event on demand as well. So we've been able to work with the technology to mean that families can really educate themselves, keep themselves updated with developments in this area, and support them with their parenting. And I've just provided some information at the end of my report about some of the areas that are key focus for us this year and going into next year. And these are the areas that, as I come back and report to you every year, I hope that I'll be able to give much more sort of detail on and talk to you about updates and improvements in these areas of practice. And that's the end of the report. So happy to take any questions.
Well, that's a terrific report and a terrific summary. Thank you very much, Lydia. I'm going to ask my colleagues first if they've got some questions. I've got a few, but I'll ask Ellen and Tammy first.
Thanks, Zena. Thank you, Lydia. It's really good to see this work starting to bear fruit, because I remember it was a long time in the planning and not easy to get off the ground. And well, as with everybody, I feel for you that this was affected so significantly by the pandemic. But I think in general, it's really reassuring to see the figures from Haringey in particular, and that from what you've said, there appears to be really strong working relationships, and hopefully that's resulting in some really good outcomes. And I think one of the reasons why I know this was a sort of, wasn't much of a choice because the law was changed anyway, but I was always happy to support this when I was seen as predecessor a few years ago, because I think the opportunities that it brings for families and for children are far more than any single borough could really provide in any meaningful way. And I think the report shows the start of that, with sort of new approaches to support and research-led practice. So I really look forward in future to hearing how you get on when you're back to work in person and things are a bit easier. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I think just to echo kind of Ellen's sentiments, it's a really, really great report actually, and it is such a shame that it's kind of had to kick off during such a difficult time when lots of your stats feel really skewed by a situation that's completely out of control. But I just wondered actually, so I thought the page 27 was just really interesting, thinking about the number of initial households that that go in, make the initial inquiry, and just how that dips. And I know you referenced at the end, that those that have started stage 1 is incredibly low. I'm fascinated as to how we go from so many, and I know it's not right. Once the people start kind of really looking into it and seeing the commitment, it's a very different thing. I just wonder, and I know you've kind of said that you believe that very low take up could be down to the pandemic, and I think that's probably really true. But I just wondered really if you felt it was purely pandemic. Are there learnings that you could take maybe about the way that we're kind of marketing things, or how early on are we talking to people about the commitment to becoming an adoptive, because it's a really long process. I kind of wondered, it feels like lots of people went out and rushed out and bought a dog in lockdown, didn't they? And I wonder if lots of people went, I'm going to adopt a child, went on, had a little look and thought, actually this looks a lot more complicated than I first realised. So I just wonder actually kind of what the learnings are from how that tails off. And kind of what your plans are to uplift kind of going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing to say is that adoption is just, an enormous commitment. I mean, it's an obvious statement really, but it's different to fostering, for example, in the sense that after you've adopted, you become the sole legal sort of parent for the child, and you don't continue to have statutory support or the support of the local authority in the same way as you do for fostering. So we see a very long lead in time, and that's what we would expect, and that's what we want. So when we get people coming forward to us who are very, very early thinking about adoption, we welcome that and we provide them with loads of information and chances to speak to us, but we don't want them to rush into their assessment. Once the assessment actually starts, it's reasonably quick. So it takes around 8 to 9 months, minimum of 6 months, but during COVID, that's been longer with the checks and things like that, to actually be approved and ready to have a child placed, which is a reasonably quick sort of period of time for that sort of thing to happen. So the other thing is that between the 2 stages that you're referring to, when someone submits an expression of interest, and between that and them starting stage 1, they will have a very detailed meeting with a manager and a social worker in the recruitment team, and they will go through their application in a lot of detail. Those meetings are often an hour and a half or 2 hours with an individual family, and they think around a whole variety of issues, and families are supported at that point then to go away and prepare fully for starting stage 1, and to be ready to then go smoothly through their assessment rather than trying to address things as they're in assessment. So I think some of what we believe we're seeing is, being a new agency, having a greater number of conversations at the inquiry stage, and now we're this year really feel like we're having a lot of people coming back to us who we had conversations with last year, who've gone away, who've really done their research and preparation, and they're ready to go into assessment, and many of them are in assessment now. So we hope that it will continue to build up all those relationships that we're forming. They will come back as those people are ready, if we're supporting and approaching them in the right way. Whether this level is particularly low or not, it's hard because we don't have, the comparative data, and that we'll see over time, obviously, as we build up our figures. But I would expect it to increase somewhat for the reasons that I've explained.
Brilliant. I'm actually really reassured to see people actually maybe taking longer to go, because it is a huge commitment. And so I'm actually really reassured to hear that you've got people that perhaps came last year and thought, I'm not quite ready, or this isn't quite right, but I've actually gone away and really thought it through and are now coming back some months later into the process. And just in case anyone is listening, I am not in any way making children like dogs. Just to be very clear, they're very different.
I have a couple of questions, Lydia. On your page 17 of the report, which is page 31 in our papers, there's the table, the family finding referrals into Adoption London North by borough, and Haringey's numbers appear to be much higher than the other authorities. I just wondered, could you comment on that? Could you give us some background to that?
Yeah.
That's my first question.
Yes, I'm happy to. So one thing to say there is that data, if you're looking at the final column, includes the number of cases that were referred into us at the point that we went live. So they were the cases that Haringey was actively family finding for when we went live, just so that it gives you a comparison to the beginning and currently. What we saw across most of the boroughs during last year is a significant drop in referrals during the periods where the courts were experiencing lots and lots of backlogs. So we have early conversations with boroughs, but we see the referrals coming through at the point that the adoption is becoming the main care plan, which will be towards the latter end of the care proceedings. And then you'll see the numbers significantly increase in Q4, which was when a lot of the care proceedings was starting to speed up again, and we've now had a lot of those come through as placement orders in the beginning of this this data year. So across the board generally, prior to the REA, Haringey had one of the highest levels of placements for adoption consistently, and that hasn't changed. So that's been consistent. That's what we would expect. Exactly as to why is something that I suppose is part of being an REA that we're learning. We're finding out about all of the boroughs we work with, and we're being able to compare different areas of practice in different ways. So I think it's going to be really helpful as we learn more and more and see more and more through the data to find ways in which boroughs can learn from each other. Some boroughs are not as strong in permanency planning arrangements, or they may, you know, maybe their social workers aren't considering adoption for children. So those are the sorts of things that we'll be focusing in on, and, you know, supporting people to look at areas of practice that they can learn from.
I'm listening to what you're saying and looking at these numbers. I wonder whether it would be useful for us to have a report on what some of the background is to why our numbers appear to be a bit higher than the other boroughs. And it's not about a criticism, it's actually just a thing for understanding what we're doing, we're doing something right, maybe it's different, what the demography is, what the breakdowns are, because this is a new thing, but this data is interesting. And would committee members agree that perhaps we have something about that? My next question was about the courts. You sort of said that there were the delays and so on. So the timescales for going through court now would be how many months?
I mean, I think Bev will probably know this better than me, or Fires, but I believe there was a report from the Family Justice, I think last month, so quite recently, saying that cases were taking, I mean, I think double or triple the timescales that they were meant to be taking. Sorry, Bev.
Triple the time.
Yeah. So they've been taking around 1.5 years to go through proceedings instead of the usual times.
6 weeks.
Thank you. So particularly what we've seen in adoption cases in the pandemic is because the final decision that the court is making is so serious and significant to remove parental responsibility from the birth parents. Understandably, the courts were really reluctant to make that decision virtually without birth parents being able to be represented in court in person. And that caused, I think, particular delays, even more so in adoption cases than in other cases. families. That's certainly something that we've sort of spoken regularly with the DFE about as REA leaders, and I know they speak with the family justice leads about as well, and is definitely improving. We're seeing that catch-up process now.
Just two more questions, then I'll let you go. The next question I've got is this is a really positive report, but not every adoption works out, and the older the children are, I suppose the odds are greater that it might break down. So how do you manage if there is a breakdown? What happens, and how does that relate back to the local authority, who as my understanding of your role and our role, we have an oversight of the children as they go through the care system and so on. So just if you could give us some quick headlines on that.
Yes, happy to. So when we look at adoption breakdowns, we normally look at those differently between breakdowns that happen before the child is adopted. So there will still be a child in care placed for adoption with the prospective adopters, and they may experience a breakdown. And then we also might have breakdowns that happen after the adoption, which are often a long time after the adoption. With the breakdowns that happen after adoption, there isn't good data generally in this area, because adopted families are legally not subject to being monitored or reviewed by children's services, and may move around the country and become the responsibility of the local authority that they live in for support as well. So those children would be coming through, for example, into your front door services, or maybe contacting us if they live in this area, but may not have been placed by anybody that we're working with at the moment. Could have been placed from anywhere in the country. So our role in those cases is to provide support, working with your social workers to help understand the adoption needs of the family and put in place the sort of the therapeutic support and things as much as we can. Much more of an area of, I suppose, of particular focus for us is the children that whose placements may break down before they are adopted, and those happen very rarely, but they do happen, and they can happen for a wide variety of reasons. But we're seeing particularly some challenges from some of the things that happened more remotely virtually during the pandemic. So particularly we're seeing children who were only seen, for example, virtually by their social workers for a particular period of time, that might have made it hard for us to see pick up on particular needs or difficulties, and I'm not particularly referring to sort of Haringey practice, but those were things that were, responses that were happening across the board. We have had a particular case with Haringey more recently, where the child hasn't remained in her adoptive placement, and our role in that case is to undertake a formal review, which is chaired by an independent person, to look at all of the background and preparation work, and to look at involving all parties, what happened and what we can take away and learn from that situation. And that's a review that's taking place at the moment imminently. So Haringey will be part of that review, and the outcomes will be shared. But we will also be capturing learning for any breakdowns that happen across Adopt London, so that we can compare and think about where there might be particular risk factors that occur.
Thank you. I think I've finished my questions. I had some more, but I think I'll probably hold on those and maybe ask the officers on some of them finer detail. But I think it's a very positive report. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Lynn, you have your hand up. I think from the members, that's all the questions. Lynn, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the report. It's really informative. Lydia, I'm the designated nurse for children in care. I was particularly concerned with regards with your what you were saying about therapeutic support and lack of mental health support, and obviously the thresholds, and I was wondering whether, although I know it may be difficult because you don't have the statistics, but across the 6 boroughs, are there any differences in the support for mental health for the young people? Are you finding? Because obviously that's something that we might need to address.
Yeah, it from our experience, it's really across the board. So when I've asked that question and I've asked about the different responses that we're getting with families who live in different areas, there is no particular theme, and we've had difficulties in every single area. And I think particularly some of the specialist acute mental health services that our families might use are also shared services that are seeing particular challenges. So I think it's something that we need to address across the board, and also something that we want to look at in terms of working with early help services in all the boroughs to think about how we respond to families who are being told that they don't reach a CAMHS threshold but who are in acute need, because I think in those cases it's really important that we then try to join up across the borough early help services and ourselves to do all that we can.
So this is something that I'll raise with the other designate doctors in the NCL and commissioning as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There are no more comments or questions either from the members or the officers. I think we just now can say thank you very much, Lydia, for giving us such a comprehensive report and for being so on the ball and answering all the questions. Thank you very much indeed, and well done to you and your colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
If we're happy, we'll accept the report, and we'll hope to get some more information about what's going on around Haringey issues in due course. And so, final report tonight, Nicola, I think is you on the annual report on the virtual school, and that is on page hold on, 50 something, or maybe 49 even, page 49. So over to you, Nicola. If you give us a rundown of all the great work you've been doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's, as usual, retrospective report because of when results come out for the children, although that was a little bit different this year, but I'll go through it anyway. So as it says here, it's for the academic year 2019-2020. So it's not for the children's achievements for this summer. So just a little bit about the role of the virtual school, which hasn't changed. So that's outlined on that page. Just looking through the structure of the virtual school has increased slightly, which is a good thing. So we do have a dedicated post-16 advisor now, as Emma referred to earlier on in the meeting. So that's made a huge difference, having that focus support in that area for our post-16 young people. They are a pretty large cohort, so we will look at further expanding that area, but it still made such a difference that social workers, designated teachers in colleges, in other providers, have a point of call, a point of contact that they can go to. So that's made a difference. And also having our early years advisory teacher as well, who is linked to the team from the early years. So that cohort, sorry, I knew that would happen the moment I started talking. That cohort is very small, so she only does 1 or 2 days a week, but having that support as well for the youngest children, so that we can make sure that they're school ready, so that we're putting support in place very early on. And again, the nurseries, the foster carers speak very highly of her, so that's making a big difference as well. So just small additions to the team, but very well received, and we will grow further. So that's was just something to mention that's happened over the course of the year. What else do I want to mention from this one? The training, our training offer has increased. it went a bit slowly as we went into lockdown, just getting used to delivering online training and how that worked, but it then worked very well. And actually the numbers of designated teachers, the numbers of foster carers, the numbers of social workers that we attracted to the training actually increased by doing it online. So I think that is something we will continue to offer going forward. And particularly that hitting those out of borough schools, they were very keen to come to our online training. So it was nice to touch base with them and deliver the same messages to them that are in borough schools and providers here as well. So that was a little bit about training. In terms of the characteristics of the virtual school, so these were taken, so this extract was from the 1st of June 2020. And so just gives you a bit of an idea of our numbers in terms of statutory school age. But because this was towards the end of an academic year, our numbers usually are a bit higher. So just to bear that in mind. But those are the sort of gives you an idea of the numbers of young people we're working with. The numbers of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, like Richard mentioned earlier, they have gone down. So you can tell us at the 1st of June 2020, I've put here we had 60 unaccompanied asylum seeking children, 16 of statutory school age and 44 were in years 12 and 13. So very different number to what we have now, because at the moment those numbers are very reduced, but it's still making sure that however large that number is, that we are supporting our unaccompanied asylum seeking children. The attainment, it wasn't published for last summer, so the DfE decided not to publish the data. So on the whole, I didn't publish it in this report because that was the advice we were given. However, I thought you would want to see at least a snapshot of some of the achievements of the children. So I have provided, and sorry, it's not on my hard copy, but I have provided an extract for the Corporate Parenting Advisory Committee of the Key Stage 4 results. So these were based on teacher assessments on the whole, centre assessments, not exams that the children sat, but those were some of the results. We can't compare them to any other year because it's just not right to do so, but it's just to give you an idea of the Key Stage 4. So those are end of year 11 results for our children, and anecdotally they did really well. Very pleased with their achievements. I think there was only one who I know we had to support with the appeal process to get that grade amended. But on the whole, most children were happy with their grades and what they got, and we were happy with their achievements. Some of the work that we did during this year has been very much affected by the pandemic and the lockdowns. So just beside that chart is just giving you also a snapshot of the provision during lockdown. So how many children in the different key stages and the percentages that we had accessing blended learning, doing remote learning, on-site provision, those who were refusing education because this the system didn't really work for everybody, especially not at the beginning, and there were some children who voted with their feet and they couldn't handle the online offer that was provided by schools, and we had to work very closely with schools to try and get it matched to the children and to make sure that the children were benefiting from what they were being provided with. And as the lockdowns progressed and more of our children started to attend school, and rather than having the online learning, they were having either blended offers or attending on-site provision full time, which was really positive. And so it was just making sure that we still monitored that very closely. And from the personal education plans, this is just for school age, but we were able to monitor the impact of some of the interventions that were put in place. So that's taken from the designated teachers' responses when they're completing the PEP, so that we can see where there's impact, where there was no impact. We're still getting them used to completing that section, so there were some where we hadn't got a response, but I thought I'd put that in there as a snapshot as well. Just going on to the next bit, in terms of the quality of provision, so we've got the majority of our children in good or outstanding schools as judged by Ofsted. So it's 80% at the time that this report was written. So again, that's very good. I always caveat that by saying those who are not in good or outstanding provision, there are reasons why. We try and make sure that that's documented on Mosaic. Occasionally, it might be a local authority that doesn't have a local school that is judged good or outstanding and might be requires improvement, and then it's making sure that that school can still meet the needs of the child. Or sometimes a school's downgraded, and again, if it's downgraded, it's just monitoring the provision, the education that the child's receiving, and making sure it's still meeting the child's needs again, and that action plans are in place to address whatever the concerns were. And where there are serious concerns, or it's felt the school is no longer meeting the child's needs, then as a last resort, we would look at a school move for that child. In terms of attendance, it has been difficult to track attendance with all the upheaval during the year. But it has been monitored, and we still have welfare call who will still do that first day calling. And even through lockdown, sometimes they did have to reduce the calling because they either didn't have the staff in themselves, or the schools would ask that they would contact them perhaps every week instead of every day, which they'd been used to doing. So we had monitored the attendance during all 3 lockdowns. So I've just put comments there so you can see that by the time we got to lockdown 3.0, as I call it, the percentage of children attending school had increased. We started with about 20% of our children attending school during the first lockdown, and increased to about 51% of them attending by the 3rd lockdown. And in terms of attendance, so this is now looking at published attendance and persistent absentees. That figure did increase slightly, but again, it's not comparable because they weren't looking at a whole academic year. The DfE weren't looking at a whole academic year. So we have to be careful when we're making comparisons, but attendance is something that we are very focused on in the virtual school. And in terms of our expulsions and suspensions, that's a fairly positive story. Fairly positive story, but it is slow progress. We're doing very well with our permanent exclusions. So far we are managing to keep those at 0. We did have 1 permanent exclusion, but I was successful in managing to get it rescinded, and that particular child was placed in alternative provision, and a new school found and support put in place for that child. And really the exclusion wasn't justified, and having discussions with the school and the professional network, we managed to come to a positive outcome for that child. So that was really good. So we've managed to keep those at 0. And it's just looking at reducing those fixed term exclusions even further. We are working with the anchor approach. We've got our EPs involved. We're looking at what specific training some of the schools need, and doing a bit more analysis of those exclusions and the schools that they're coming from, looking at the particular children and where there are trends and patterns and support that we can help with. Personal education plans. As was mentioned earlier, again, positive news story on the personal education plans. We have managed to improve the completion rate. So at the time that this was written, it was 91%. Currently it's higher than that, but at that time it was 91%, which is still above our target of 90%. We are striving for every child to have a personal education plan, but sometimes we may never get to 100% because of when a child or young person comes into care, and we just might not get the personal education plan meeting done as quickly as it needed to be, but we are working on that. And pupil premium, that continued throughout the year as well. There was an increased discretionary payment in the spring term, and that was to support schools, well, to provide funding to schools so that they could support children with their emotional health and well-being, for example, with catch-up support, with anything that the children really needed because of the impact of all those lockdowns on their education, and just trying to get them back on an even keel, helping them to settle in. So we were quite flexible with what schools could use that for. And a lot of schools have been very creative in that. So that was something just I thought I'd cite in the annual report. In terms of the local initiative section, some of the things that we would normally do, so for example, the winter party for the younger children, we weren't able to put on, but in each instance, we always try to make sure that the children didn't completely miss out. So there would be some kind of mail out or some kind of Zoom meeting to try and make sure that we still kept in contact with those children, and they still had some of those. I've lost my word, but not extracurricular, but some of those other activities that aren't sort of the core educational activities, they still benefited from. We still are linked with Tottenham Hotspur Foundation. So one of the things that happened, for example, was when Jose Mourinho was manager of Tottenham Hotspur, they had a Zoom meeting, and they were able to, the children and young people were able to ask him questions and interviewed him, which they loved. It was great having him as the ambassador. I know Lauren, who works as part of To Care Is To Do, worked really hard to get him. So it was unfortunate that then shortly after that meeting and that Zoom call, he got sacked. But the children and young people loved it. It went down really well. So we're hoping that we can make closer links again there with either the new manager or some of those first team players. But that did happen. So that's another example. We also had the First Friday Art Club, which was very successful online. It's moved to in person, which doesn't seem to be being quite as successful actually. But we're going to be promoting that a little bit more. But perhaps the children prefer to have it online because that's when we got the most participants. So again, Lauren is looking into that and just seeing what the issue is with getting the children in face to face. But anyway, the option's there for them. For the younger children, we've linked with Groundswell Arts, Sing Our Story. So that's when the children work with a professional musician to create their own songs. So each child in the early years, we're hoping will have their own song, and link it with the social worker as well. So it becomes part of their life story work as well. I think so far we've only had one child successfully go through the process. It doesn't take very long, but we've only had one child go through it, but very positive feedback from that foster care and from the child. So we are rolling that out to the rest of the early years, and some of the primary age children as well, we think will benefit from that. And then lastly, I just included there some of the priorities. So these aren't all of the priorities of the virtual school, but just some of the priorities of the virtual school. And I thought it was useful to have sort of documented what some of the key achievements have been, because often you'll just see what the priorities are, but not necessarily the progress we've made on achieving them. So especially during this COVID year, so to speak, I thought it was important just to outline some of those. So in terms of some of the posts that have been created, for example, the RAG rated tracking system that we've implemented for all of the key stages. We're still working on the one for post-16 because it's a little bit more complicated, but having that RAG rated system so that we can at a glance see how children are progressing, because without levels that is quite problematic, but we need a way to be able to do that. So we've got systems in place that are looking at that. Yeah, I'll stop talking, I think.
Thank you very much. I wrote a note to Anne just saying that your enthusiasm was quite infectious. And I think if I can say, before we get to some questions, all the reports tonight, I think if anything characterises people working in this system is the enthusiasm with which you present and with which you talk about your work. I think it comes over enormously and I think is greatly appreciated, and that has been from everybody who has spoken tonight. Questions?
I don't have any questions. I just, once again, I think I just want to say thank you. It's been such a difficult year, and I've had a kid trying to learn virtually without anything else really going on in his life other than what to have for dinner. And so I know, it's been so difficult to try and entertain kids and deal with kids learning online. And I think to have achieved all of this with all of the other kind of challenges going on in society and in those children's lives, I suppose, is actually really phenomenal. So a huge well done to you and your team, and thank you for your patience as well. It's really late. It's like 9:10, and you were so enthusiastic. I don't think I would have been, but no, it is amazing, and I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing how much more we can achieve now. Things feel a bit more back to normal for the kids. They're at least face to face, aren't they? But no, it's an amazing work. Really well done.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'd just echo everything Tammy said. I haven't been looking after a child, but I have been educating older young people, and they're ones who've actively chosen to be at university, and that was still really, really difficult to keep them going most of the time. So yeah, so really, really well done, and thank you for such a comprehensive report, and good luck for this year as things settle down again. And I'm sure that all the good progress will be built on, and we'll continue to see some really great results for our young people, because that's been such a hallmark of the virtual school in Haringey. So thanks very much, Nicola, and to all of your team.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I do have a question. That's my hallmark. No, it's about the overlap. I see Jackie is sitting there, and I didn't want her to be left out. So I have got a question, which is about the interrelationship with EHCPs and how that's been managed over the year. I have tried to find it in the report and I couldn't find it. And I just wonder, either you or Jackie might wish to tell us, because a large number of children who are looked after do have EHCPs, so we have to keep our eye firmly on that. So I don't know, Jackie, would you like to comment?
It was only to say that
Nicola, I don't mind who does.
I mean, Nicola will probably know the answer. I certainly don't, but I know we've got about 80 children and young people who are looked after care leavers or have an education healthcare plan. So it would be good to know the support that's offered to them too.
I mean, we have always worked closely with the Scnd team. So we had a dedicated person. So at the time of this report being produced, we had a dedicated person. So we do always work closely with Scnd. I think prior to the Scnd inspection, we did a big cleanse of the data and just making sure that we had a record of all those children who had EHCPs, those who were on Scnd support as well, so that we knew who the children were. We also had forensically made sure that we had made contact with those schools, so we knew what support the children were getting, made sure that they had copies of the EHCP, for example. And I know the Scnd team had been doing the same, and so we worked very closely together. The number here actually in this report, the numbers of children and young people with plans has increased. And the children on Scnd support. So it is a big percentage of our cohort. So if you took an average school, they wouldn't have quite this many children with EHCPs and on SEND support. So it is an area of work, and going forward, we're looking at having possibly, I won't say definitely, but possibly having a virtual school teacher who has responsibility for looking specifically at those children and young people. I just need to think through if that's going to be fair, because they're going to be some of the more complex children, and we just need to make sure the workload is spread fairly. So, but yeah, going forward, that's what we hope to do, so have a dedicated person in the virtual school who focuses specifically on that area.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. I have no more questions. Anybody? Everybody's ready to go home, I think. Oh, you must be ready. You're at home, so I hope you can enjoy the rest of your evenings. I think that brings the meeting to a close, unless there's any other business that anybody's going to bring up, which I don't think they are. And just again, thank you to everyone. I think your enthusiasm for your work is something really to be recognised and congratulated.
Thank you very much, everyone. See you tomorrow. Good night. You can go now.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.